Hello, dear listener, and welcome to Sitcom Showdown. It's Jeffers here, and hello, Steve.
Hello, Jeff. Hello, listeners.
Oh, this is, tell us why it's such an epic episode, Steve.
It's a big one. It's episode 100. I've got something to celebrate.
Oh, really? Oh, very germane.
Yes. The reason for that will become clear as we move on in this episode.
Ooh.
But yes, episode 100, how exciting. I had a look, and this all started just over 6 years ago. March 4th, 2017 was our first episode. Basil the Rat.
So if we timed it properly as we intended to for March...
we would have been very close. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Still having fun. Yeah, so I thought, what is something from the top shelf, what's something really good that I can bring to talk about to celebrate the 100th episode? Then it hit me, are you being served? We haven't talked about that before.
No, which is surprising when you think about it.
I think it's very surprising. Yes, Are You Being Served is a British sitcom that follows the misadventures of the staff of the ladies' and gentlemen's clothing departments in the Grace Brothers department store. I'm assuming a large number of the listeners will know Are You Being Served, but...
You'd hope so, because I was under the impression it was always really popular in America too.
Yes, well, it ran on the BBC for 10 series, which is huge. 69 episodes between the 8th of September 1972 and the 1st of April 1985. So if anyone hasn't heard of it, maybe it's because of the time that's passed since it was actually on the air. There was also a 1977 film and a spin-off series called Grace and Favour, which had the same main cast, and that was on in 91 and 92. And they returned as proprietors of a manor house which was being run as a country hotel. And, can't forget this, there was a one-off episode with a new cast in 2016.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I'm Richard. I'm supposed to start work today.
Which department?
Menswear.
Oh, no, quite impossible. I'm head of menswear, and as you would be under myself, I would know about that.
Strictly speaking, he'd be under me, and I'd definitely know about that.
Strictly speaking, he would be under Mr Granger. Yes, that would explain matters. What is your full name?
Richard Conway.
Now, Mr Humphreys, would you supply Mr Conway with a new suit? Mr Granger, take his inside leg measurement, would you? Mr Humphreys tends to make a meal of such things.
Miss Brahms, your attention to the job in hand, if you please.
Sorry, Mrs Slocum, but did you just see that?
See what?
That boy just gave me a wink.
Somebody call the police.
Yes.
What did you...
Well,
Did
see...
you like that one, or what did you think of it?
It's very fashionable to bash all the remakes they did, like Porridge, and they did Are You Being Served, and they did a few others as well, and I quite enjoyed them all.
Oh, very good.
You know,
very good.
but
I never
I am
watched
easy
it,
to
so
please.
I can't say.
Yeah, oh really? Dude, I'll have to see if I've got it in the collection and whip it out.
Nice. Well, this was created and written by David Croft and Jeremy Lloyd, who were also known as a partnership for Allo Allo, which we covered in episode 54. And David Croft, with another teammate, Jimmy Perry, he did Dad's Army, It Ain't Half Hot Mum, Heidi High, and You Rang My Lord. So he's a powerhouse writer, that's for sure.
100,000,000%. And producer, yeah.
Yeah.
What is there no mention of Oh Dr. Beeching, or did you just leave out all the ones you hadn't heard of?
It's not an exhaustive list, that's for sure.
Fair enough. Okay, cool.
Who was that one? Who did that one have in it?
It had Paul Shane in it from Heidi High, and it had, the usual crowd. It had Jeffrey Holland in it as well from Heidi High, so it had a lot of the same people from various other projects they'd done.
It's interesting you say that, because as we move through and start talking about the stars of the show now, we'll see that they went back and worked with these people after this show. So, yes, it must be a thing where you continue working with people.
If you're on a winner.
Yeah, exactly. So how about the stars of the show? The stars and the characters of this show. Mr. Wilberforce Claiborne Humphreys was played by John Inman. Mr. Humphreys was the sales assistant in the gents department. He is a camp man who lives with his mother.
Yep.
A very well-known character. John went on to play the lead in two other sitcoms called Odd Man Out, which aired for 7 episodes on ITV in 1977, and Take a Letter, Mr Jones, with Rula Lenska, also on the ITV network, and that was in 1981.
Blimey.
Do you know Rula Lenska?
I totally know Rula Lenska. She came to Perth, Steve.
What?
No, that's... Rula Lenska and Dennis Waterman, they popped over here in the 80s and visited our neck of the woods.
Serious?
They visited Pioneer Village. And all the people came out and had their photos taken with Rula Lenska and Dennis.
Yeah. Well, he would have been immensely popular at the time, right?
Oh, crikey,
Following
yes.
Minder and all that.
Absolutely. I think that might have been their peak popularity. Who knows? But when you look at the photo, she's a remarkably tall lady, Rula Lenska.
Yep.
Sorry, can we rewind here a bit?
Go on.
What was the name of the second other John Inman one? Take a Letter, Mr. Jones.
Take a Letter, Mr. Jones.
Okay.
I don't know. Is he a postie? I don't know.
No, you know he's a secretary. Come on now. Take a letter. Anyway.
Take a letter. Oh, as in, I'm about to dictate you a letter?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. From 1980 to 1981, he also played Mr Humphries, the same Mr Humphries, in the Australian version of A Being Served. And he was the only member of the original British cast to do so.
Oh, I am shocked. This seems to never work, though, does it?
Well, I'm about to go on a slight diversion here.
Oh, good.
The fact that there was an Australian series of this show is a measure of its popularity down under. It was ranked as the top-rated show on Australian television for 1978.
No way.
Totally. Being watched by 2,255,000 people in 5 cities. Now, that may sound like small change to people from the UK or the US, but in Australian numbers, and particularly from the 1978, that's huge.
Okay, so basically that would have been well over 10% of the population. That would have been up around, in 1978, I'm going to take a stab and say somewhere between 15 and 20% of the population.
And I was wondering whether I might have been one of the people watching it at the time.
Could be.
A young Steve, maybe. Certainly watched it in my younger years, and I'm assuming you did as well. So just to continue on this diversion before we make our way back to John Inman. In 1979... a pilot for an American version of A Being Served, which was called Beans of Boston, was produced.
Oh, my goodness.
I was thinking, if we could just find that on YouTube, we could do a review of that.
Chance a look, or did you not chance
No, I haven't gone there.
Steve-o. Right, sorry, what was that title again? I got my pen ready.
Beans of Boston.
Boston. Makes it sound like he's working in a baked bean factory for Heinz or something.
That's right.
Oh, my word.
Now so we're coming back to John Inman now, and I've got some musical triv for you, Jeff, because I know you like that. I don't know if the listeners will enjoy this, but I did. So between 1975 and 1977, DJ M Records released 5 singles by John Inman, usually in character as Mr Humphries. Are You Being Served, Sir reached number 39 in the UK single chart.
Oh.
He released an LP of the same name and 2 further albums, I'm Free in 1977 and With a Bit of Brass in 1978.
I'm free. Some say I do, and some say I don't. Some say perhaps, or maybe. Whatever the answer, one thing's sure, there's no doubt. I'm free, I'm free, I'm free, and nobody's freer than me. I'm free, I'm free, all joined together. I'm free. Oh, you're all so kind.
Have these been remastered and re-released on CD for only $90 or $100 a pop? Surely they must have been.
I don't know.
Come on now.
That's amazing.
I've got to track that down.
Right, we're moving on to Mrs. Betty Slocum, a senior sales assistant and head of the ladies department. Mrs. Slocum is known for her changing hair colour and making double entendres about her cat Tiddles, which she refers to as my pussy, and she's played by Molly Sugden. Now, do you want to say anything about that before we move on?
She, of course, because I thought you were going to mention Comeback Mrs. Noah.
Well, that's the next thing I've got.
Oh, beauty. Good,
yes.
Good.
So Lloyd and Croft wrote a sitcom for Molly called Comeback Mrs. Noah that aired on BBC One from July to August 78. And this sounds amazing. So the plot is, or the situation, in 2050, British housewife Gertrude Noah wins a cookery competition and is awarded a tour of Britannia 7, the UK's new space exploration vehicle, but the craft is accidentally sent blasting off into space with Mrs. Noah on it. That just sounds totally crackers and out there.
It is.
Have you seen a bit of it?
Yeah, I've watched Come Back, Mrs. Noah.
No way.
Yeah. When I went through my Crofton Perry phase. Yeah, totally. And so two of the other people in it are the two main officers from It Ain't Our Fault Mum. So it was good to see them again, which is Michael Knowles and the other bloke. Mm-hmm. I didn't think it was fantastically excellent, but it wasn't too bad.
It says in my notes that some regarded it as one of the worst British sitcoms ever made.
Oh, wow.
Where do you stand
It'd be
on
up
that?
against some stiff competition.
Molly was also well known for playing Nellie in Coronation Street, Mrs. Hutchinson in The Liverbirds, Ida in That's My Boy, and Nora in My Husband and I. And she was in that character was in Coronation Street from 65 to 76. And the Liverbirds, she seems to have been in that from 71 to 96, if I've got that right. So she was just working for ages and ages and ages. Yes, let's go on to, well, someone else that worked for ages. Wendy Richard as Miss Shirley Brahms. Miss Brahms is a young, attractive, working-class, Cockney-speaking junior sales assistant to Mrs. Slocum, so in the ladies' department. So Wendy famously starred as Pauline Fowler in EastEnders.
Yes.
Over 2,000 episodes until she departed in 2006.
Yeah.
Then in April 2007, it was announced that she would be starring or appearing in a new sitcom by David Croft called Here Comes the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
And the project came about because she personally asked David Croft to write something for her. A pilot was made, which was considered to be poor, and it was never transmitted. So just another one. This is what I'm saying, like, they wrote stuff for loads and loads of these people.
So I wonder why, who can we pin the blame on that it was poor? Because you look at the individuals involved and you think, well, all the individuals involved have had solid
on paper
careers.
The stats are good, aren't they? You'd expect a winner. Let's talk Captain Peacock. Captain Peacock was played by Frank Thornton, and Captain Peacock was the haughty floor walker who that's my archetype impersonation. Purportedly fought in the North Africa campaign of World War II and in the Pacific Theatre, but was accused of actually being a corporal in the Service Corps and never saw combat. Now, the integrity of this character is something that we're going to be discussing at length in this episode, so I was a bit surprised actually to see that this was the case, that he might have been misrepresenting his service. What do you say to that? I always viewed him as a kind of upstanding dude.
It doesn't seem like him.
Well, a floor walker. I had to look up a floor walker.
Right.
A floor walker was, perhaps it still is, a senior employee in a large shop who supervises assistants, directs customers, and answers queries.
I like to think of, by that description, it's bringing to mind, like the casino pit boss, but of apparel. So he's the pit boss of apparel.
Nice. I like that. So Frank actually served as an airman in the Royal Air Force before ending World War II as an officer. So, he wasn't making that up.
No.
He had a long career in film and TV. Now we're going to talk about the Larks, Jeff. From 66 to 68, he starred in the BBC radio comedy The Embassy Lark, which was a spin-off of The Navy Lark.
Oh, with John Pertwee.
Well, he did appear in at least one episode of The Navy Lark, filling in for John Pertwee, who was indisposed.
Whoa, okay.
So they didn't appear in the same one on that occasion. He also appeared in at least one episode of The Navy Lark as his character from The Embassy Lark, so there was a bit of crossover there. And in 1969, he starred in The Big Business Lark, which ran for one season of 13 episodes. It was not strictly a spin-off from The Navy Lark, other than being another lark, which were all written by Laurie Wyman. Have you ever delved into the Larks?
No.
Well, who else have we got? We've got Mr Rumbold, Mr Cuthbert Rumbold, played by Nicholas Smith, and Mr Rumbold is the autocratic, obsequious, yet bumbling and incompetent floor manager. So you don't see him on the floor, but he's managing things behind the scenes. We've also got Mr Lucas, who was played by Trevor Bannister in series 1 to 7. He is a young, penniless, womanising junior salesman and a source of irritation to the female sales staff. Well, this was really interesting. Trevor, like, he was a star of some standing, and A Being Served was originally intended as a vehicle for him. So he's got top billing in this episode.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed this?
No, but I have heard the story that because when the show launched, John Inman's character became so popular and wasn't supposed to be, that Trevor Bannister's nose was a bit tweaked by that.
Right.
He was supposed to be the star, but obviously it didn't pan out that way. And it's interesting you bring that up where you say young, because I'm just looking it up. So he was 38 at that point. So how can he be the young junior salesman at 38? So he was, even if he was playing someone 15 years younger.
John Inman might have been younger than him at the time.
Oh,
who knows?
Oh, Steve, I'm going to look that up. I doubt it, but yes.
So you're wondering who he shared the billing with? So it was Molly. They used to take turns at and of course she'd been on Coronation Street for quite a while at that point. So he went on to play a recurring character in the last. Oh my Summer
goodness! Wine. He was a year younger than Mr. Lucas.
No
John
way.
Inman. No way. That's what I said too, because he's got grey hair and all that.
Huh.
Well, Eddie, well.
There you go. Well, let's talk about Arthur Brough, who played Mr. Ernest Granger. Now, Mr. Granger was only in series 1 to 5. Of course, we're going to be talking about an episode from one of those series. Mr. Granger, was a 40-year veteran of Grace Brothers and a senior sales assistant and head of the gents department. He often falls asleep on the job, is usually grumpy, and wears a measuring tape over his shoulders. Yeah, so Arthur is really interesting. He wasn't born in the previous century, but he was born in 1905.
Oh.
And he started his own repertory theatre companies in different places.
Oh.
And some of these companies launched the career of many prominent actors, including Trevor Bannister, who we were just talking about. So they knew each other from way back.
Whoa.
With the outbreak of World War II, he enlisted in the Royal Navy, where he served for the duration of the war, and his service included helping with the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940. His ship returning to the rescue scene several times to bring soldiers home before the Nazis reached them at the seaport.
Good Lord.
Amazing, isn't it? And after A Being Served completed its 5th series in 1977, on 22nd of March 1978, his wife of almost 50 years, Elizabeth, died, and he was emotionally devastated and then announced that he was going to be quitting acting. And he died just 2 months after her.
Whoa.
In Folkestone, which is one of the places where he started a theatre company.
Cool. I wonder if it was a broken heart situation for the poor chappie.
Sounds like it. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff about him. But we've got to keep going. This
is the problem with these huge cast shows, isn't it?
Young Mr. Grace, which is a bit funny because he's actually an old codger, isn't he? Is a very old, rich but stingy store owner who surrounds himself with attractive young women. Oh, how true. And young Mr. Grace was played by Harold Bennett. Now, Harold had played a recurring character in Dad's Army.
Yes, indeed.
For 13 episodes. Are you familiar with that character?
Totally.
Yeah?
Yep. And also, Wendy Richard was in Dad's Army in the early years.
Just as a one-off?
Probably, yeah. She was in 1 or 2 episodes, maybe a couple more. She went out with Private Walker, who's going to come up later on as we talk about this show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that might have even been 1969 she was in Dad's Army. Certainly 1970 or 71, I dare say. I could be dead wrong. But yeah. And a lot of the people you're mentioning also did some lovely guest turns on The Goodies.
Oh.
Frank Thornton did a great appearance in an episode alongside John LeMessurier in the Farm Fresh Food episode.
In the same episode?
Top 5. Yeah. He played the waiter in the restaurant. Anyway, I shan't interrupt you. Let's keep rolling.
Mr. Harmon, he started as a character in Series 4 and went on to be in Series 4 through to 10. And he was Mr. Mash's replacement as the maintenance man. Although he holds the same position as Mr. Mash, the staff are much more friendly with him, with Mr. Harmon, that is, than they were with Mr. Mash. And did I say that he was played by Arthur English?
No, I don't think
he was played by Arthur English.
Oh.
Lastly, Mrs. Peacock appears in this episode, and she was played by Diana King. Diana, I went through her IMDb. She didn't seem to be a permanent fixture in anything,
But she was in everything.
Oh, but she was in everything. You're totally right.
For one episode.
An impressive list of guest appearances, including Dad's Army, Sykes, Bless This House, Fawlty Towers, George and Mildred, Rising Damp, and Some Mothers Do Have 'Em.
Cool, blimey.
Far out.
But she died fairly young in 1986.
Right.
That's not too long after this, only a mere decade. Yes, there you go.
Decade.
Yes.
You're aging yourself when you view decades as
mere?
a short span of time. All right. Well, we're going to go away and come back with the synopsis.
Cool.
Ground floor perfumery, stationery and leather goods, wigs and haberdashery, kitchenware and food going up. First floor, telephones, gents' ready-made suits, shirts, socks, ties, hats, underwear and shoes going up.
Yes, I am a bit late. There's a reason, of course.
Yeah, and here it comes.
I'm afraid I overslept. So did Mrs. Peacock. And the alarm failed to go off.
Yes. Well, the alarm's gone off all right now. Mrs. Peacock just phoned.
What did she say?
She wanted to know if you got back all right.
How thoughtful of her.
From your sales conference in Birmingham.
Yes, well, I can explain that. Yes.
You better explain to her now.
Men's ready-made? Oh, hello, my dear. How sweet of you to ring. What on earth makes you think that I wasn't in Birmingham? How could your brother have seen me driving through Reading? But, darling, there must be lots of Fords with a broken rear window, missing hubcaps, and a dent in the rear wing. Huh? Well, if he had a girl with her, that proves it wasn't me.
So before we get into the actual synopsis, I've chosen an episode called Oh, What a Tangled Web, which was episode 6 of season 4. And you might guess that being episode 6 of a British sitcom, it was the final episode of season 4. Now, I chose this by looking at lists of people's top-rated A Being Served episodes.
Oh.
And then I watched half a dozen also of the top-rated episodes. All the ones that had been most commonly listed there. And I chose this one because it was my favourite of those. Mm. It's rated an 8.2 on IMDb and rated number 7 on their list. All right, well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. And as usual, we will be talking about the gags as we make our way through. So by all means, if I forget something, Jeff, jump in.
There's too many to speak of, but yes, jolly good.
Yes,
we're gonna have clips, I think.
Yes, I've nominated a few as we move through. So we start with a very quick, in fact, a 6-second scene at the men's counter at the start of the day, with Mr. Humphries looking at his watch and remarking to Mr. Lucas that Captain Peacock is uncharacteristically late. And then we flick across to the ladies' counter, where the ladies are having a bit of a chat because, there's no customers through the door quite yet. And Mrs. Slocum is telling Miss Brahms that she has a job interview for a buyer's job. I'm guessing someone that, buys the stuff that's going to go onto the shelves. So there we have the A and B plots, essentially. Captain Peacock's whereabouts and Mrs. Slocum's interview.
Would you describe this episode as 88% A plot and a mere 12% B plot, or even less?
I would, those proportions would be about right.
Yeah.
I would guess. Anyhow, the person that they're sending from personnel to do the interview is a woman, we know that. And that, of course, means that Mrs. Slocum can't use her usual interview technique, which is to wear a short skirt and cross her legs. What did you make of that?
I don't know. She was Sharon Stone many years before Sharon Stone.
Yeah. I don't think Sharon Stone was going for a job interview. Wasn't she being interrogated by the police?
I think she uncrossed her legs.
Oh my goodness! How did we get?
How did we get onto this?
Bring it back. Mr. Harmon interrupts the ladies to deliver a display for a new party wig. Now I think it's called the Beauty Bonce.
Oh really? I like that.
It's a bit hard to figure out, but that's what I think it is. And he gives them an amusing sales pitch of his own invention for the Beauty Bonce, but it leaves them unimpressed. And Mrs. Slocum is threatening to sick Captain Peacock onto him if he doesn't leave Sharpitch, because I think he's not supposed to appear
What customers
on the floor
could
while
be.
customers are coming through.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mr. Harmon is not deterred by these threats. No. He knows that Captain Peacock's not around, so...
He ain't going to get busted.
Yeah, exactly. And further, Mr. Harmon has also noticed that Mr. Rumbold's secretary, Miss Hazelwood, is yet to appear.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So the link in his mind between the two things is that Captain Peacock was favouring Miss Hazelwood with his blow tickler, a.k.a. party horn or party blowout, at the last Christmas party.
Yep. Everyone says so. Guilty as charged.
I got told off for calling it a blow tickler when I brought my bag of blow ticklers home tonight. No one was particularly impressed.
Oh.
I'm not sure that a party horn is a better...
No.
is a better alternative, though.
Absolutely not. Now that you come to mention it. Oh, all right. Well, I think we should move swiftly on.
All right. Mrs. Slocum, because, you know, Mr. Harmon's mentioning this to the ladies. Mrs. Slocum thinks that Captain Peacock is much too old for Miss Hazelwood, and Miss Brahms thinks it's unlikely that they're a couple of sorts, because Miss Hazelwood is ever so common, to which Mr. Harmon says, "It's not a matter of being common, darling. You ain't exactly Esther Rancid, are you?"
Yes.
Now, I think this is rhyming slang for Dame Esther Louise Ranson, DBE.
Yes, with the teeth.
With the teeth. She was an English journalist and television presenter who presented the BBC television series That's Life for 21 years. And she was also the subject of a joke in Bottom.
Yep.
Do you want to...
Yeah, well, so, okay, I'll do, because Eddie would make, you know, like they're in the flat and they're trying to make a drink and they mix together all the leftover bits of whatever they've got lying around. And, of course, when you drink it, you go... because it's so shocking to the taste buds. And, yes, and then, of course, that draws your lips up over your teeth.
Exposing
and, yes, and they called it... Well, they were going to call it the Esther Ranson, but for a while they were going to call it instead of a Bloody Mary, the Bloody Awful.
Oh, Jeff, you're very good. That was from an episode of Bottom called Culture.
With the famous chess. Do you remember the
No.
chess scene? Oh, Steve, it's an all-time classic.
But I'm presuming it's not very cultured.
No.
No. Very good.
This is Bottom we're talking about here.
Yes, exactly. Mr. Granger joins the blokes and asks if Mr. Peacock has... Mr. Peacock. Now I'm doing it.
Yeah, sorry.
If Captain Peacock has come in yet. And now we learn that similar scurrilous gossip is going around the men's counter about Captain Peacock. Mr. Granger laments having mistletoe at the Christmas party. Because, you know...
Snogging.
Exactly. But Mr. Lucas thinks that Postman's Knock was the culprit. Now...
Isn't that also snogging?
I'm gonna go on another tangent here.
Oh, good.
Postman's Knock is a variation of a game called Post Office, where one person is chosen by a group to be the postman, and they go outside and knock on the door. Another person is chosen by the rest of the group to answer the door and pays for the letter with a kiss. Then another person is chosen to be the postman, and so on it goes. So they'd been playing this game at the Christmas party as well. Mr. Humphries recalls that it was very badly organised. I got a parcel with 12 stamps on it. I called out for 3 and got the night watchman. I don't know.
I don't understand that.
I don't understand that. Yes, it sounds like an even stranger variation of the game. Mr. Lucas recalls that he got Mrs. Slocum. And he sounds very unimpressed.
Just you mentioning it in a dry way is just making both of us laugh at the very thought. So there, job done.
Now, references to the game of Post Office or its variants are a sitcom staple. Returning to Bottom, in an episode called Accident, Richie suggests that he, Eddie, Spudgun, and Dave the Hedgehog play Postman's Knock at his birthday party, despite the 4 guys being the only people there.
And they kiss. He goes, "Oh, but we don't have to." Oh, well, we can give it a try. Okay, maybe not. Poor Richie.
Boy. It was also mentioned in I Love Lucy, Leave It to Beaver, Bewitched, All in the Family, and The Cosby Show.
Wow, what? Hang on a second. This didn't penetrate Australia. How did we not get this great cultural import in which we could get kisses?
Yeah, we've missed a...
So I stopped you mid-flow. Was there more American action?
No, I was just going to say it was also, or again mentioned in Are You Being Served in the 1981 Christmas special.
So this is astonishing me, this research. How do you just type in Postman's Knock sitcom and see what comes up? Is someone...
No. I just looked up the game and some some loony has
with a lot of time on their
dedicated
hands.
a month of their time to a Wikipedia page or something like that. And I guess people have just added
Oh, man. I feel like
all
we
this
should
detail.
send them a
Cultural references.
gift card or something. Or that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
If you're listening and it was your work, very good, very good. I apologise for calling you a loony. Now we have a little clip where we learn that the mistletoe antics and Postman's Knock wasn't the only suspicious activity at the Christmas party.
I didn't see Captain Peacock at all that evening.
Well, he was with Mr Rumbold's secretary. Yeah, and then he told her that we were going to play sardines, and he took her into the broom cupboard.
We'd never have found him yet, except he caught his blow tickler in the door.
She said she'd missed her last bus, so he said he'd give her a lift home to Reading.
He was last seen surrounded by policemen playing Amazing Grace on a breathalyzer bag.
I do love the interplay between Mr Humphries and Mr Lucas because they're such a good team, and especially when they're pitted against Captain Peacock. It's great.
They've got chemistry.
Yeah.
Their conversation is interrupted by a phone call from Mrs Peacock, wanting to know if Captain Peacock got back safely from his conference in Birmingham. Now, of course, Mr Humphries, who has answered the phone, knows full well that there was no conference. And now we've got two conversations happening at the same time. We've got Mr Humphries on the phone to Mrs Peacock and Mr Humphries talking to Mr Lucas off to the side of the phone call. So Mr Humphries, covering for the boss, confirms that Captain Peacock has arrived, but he's dealing with a customer elsewhere in the store. And Mr Lucas replies, probably in Reading. Loud enough, just loud enough for Mrs Peacock to potentially have heard it. So Mr Humphrey says, in order to cover that, probably in bedding.
Yes. Yeah. This is, we see this a lot this episode, don't we? Someone in the background trying to give the game away and the person on the phone desperately scrambling to cover.
Yep. They're having fun with it.
We get a bit of this later on with Stephanie and Carl Shorten, don't we, Steve?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, cool. Before you move on,
yes.
I just want to mention that earlier when Mr Peacock had come in, and everyone knows he's dead set late, but you don't often get the chance to get the jump on Captain Peacock.
No.
And
they
says,
all loving it.
Good morning, Miss Bruff. Good morning, Mrs Slocum. And she says, good afternoon, Captain Peacock, with a beautiful, big, cheeky, you're for the high jump now.
Yep.
Pompous dude.
It's time for some payback.
Yeah. I just, the delivery. But yes, good afternoon. Classic.
Anyway, Mrs Peacock is not satisfied by this information, so she ends the call and says that she will call back later. Of course, this has also raised the staff's suspicions, hasn't it? And the circumstantial evidence, i.e. the fact that Captain Peacock didn't go home and he lied to his wife, it's becoming quite compelling.
Yeah, he's got something to hide.
He's hiding something. We don't know exactly what yet, but yes, definitely something. So after a startling revelation that Mr Granger once got a workmate in haberdashery pregnant, a.k.a. the Pudding Club, and yes, I had to look up what the Pudding Club was. Did you know what that was?
Oh, they use it all the time in these Croft and Perry sitcoms.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Anyway, who should arrive from separate lifts, but at the same time? But Captain Peacock and Miss Hazelwood. And the staff, this is really funny, they're watching them arrive out of the lifts using, like from their counters, using mirrors.
Yes.
And when they're looking in the mirror, they can see them swap. They've obviously got their bags around the wrong way, so they swap bags. That's so incriminating. It's very suspicious. And Captain Peacock, he can't really avoid making an explanation for being late because, like you said, he's obviously been drilling people for a long, long time about being late. So he says, I'm afraid I overslept, and so did Mrs. Peacock, and the alarm failed to go off.
And, as we've just heard, Steve, she was just on the blower to them. So,
Yeah.
So he's well and truly digging himself in.
Yeah, so, talk about, what a tangled web we weave. He's really weaving a web of lies and getting himself caught in it.
There's another brilliant moment, because obviously, as you've described, Miss Hazelwood and Captain Peacock have walked in and the staff are using the mirrors to look over their shoulder so that they aren't seen to be staring at Captain Peacock because they don't want recriminations later on. But almost the best bit of that is, I think it's either Mr. Lucas or Mr. Humphries says, quick, act like nothing's going on. And then they both start singing and going all this, sort of in a way that you normally see people go.
Did you see
see that? Did you see that?
Carry on as though nothing has happened.
Good morning, Mr. Humphries.
Oh, good morning, Captain Peacock.
Good morning, Mrs. Slocum.
Good afternoon, Captain Peacock.
Are you suggesting they're not normally
They're
happy
not
and singing
normally
at the
inside?
start of the day?
No, lordy no. Normally what happens at the start of these episodes is Captain Peacock will have to chide Mr. Humphries for being late, and he's always got an amazing story about why he was late due to some incredibly unlikely set of circumstances involving a sailor and a vehicle of some sort that's all perfectly innocent.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. Whereas Mr. Lucas doesn't have any very... all his tales are just flat out lies because he's been hammered and been out dancing the night before and not having any luck at all with the ladies. So this is why this is such a good episode, because we avoid all those cliches and we, the tables are turned, Steve.
Exactly. And the staff made it known that they know about the web of lies because of Mrs. Peacock's call. Now they're interrupted by Mrs. Peacock calling back, which Captain Peacock now answers, and in an overheard conversation, we discover that Mrs. Peacock knows he wasn't in Birmingham at the conference because he was spotted by her brother driving through Reading in their distinctive Ford with a broken rear window, missing hubcaps, and a dent in the rear wing, and with a woman too. So
it's such a good one-way exchange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's... Although you're not hearing both sides, it is very good. And he's continuing to try and fob her off, but she hangs up and ominously she's now on her way to the store. We continue in a similar vein in Mr. Rumbold's office, where both Captain Peacock and Miss Hazelwood are separately obliged to provide an explanation for being late. And what this scene does is threefold. It makes them look even more guilty because of the stories that they're spinning to Mr. Rumbold. It also demonstrates that Mr. Rumbold, unlike the other staff, is going to play this situation with an absolutely straight bat, as he denies Captain Peacock's request for an alibi when his wife is going to arrive in the store. And thirdly, we establish that Miss Hazelwood's father is coming in now to find out what's going on.
So we've got two angry people coming in.
Yep, the stakes are going through the roof, Jeff, because we've got all these angry people coming in.
That was beautifully phrased, the straight bat, so well done there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And we're going to revert back to the 12% B plot, as Mr. Rumbold is advised via a phone call that Mrs. Cannon from HR is going to use his office to interview Mrs. Slocum, so he's got to vacate for a short period of time. And Mrs. Slocum gets called through to his office soon after, and Mrs. Peacock arrives. Now, I think it's worth noting that the staff have never met Mrs. Peacock before, so they don't know what she looks like.
Yep, and they also don't know what the interviewer lady, Mrs. Cannon, looks like.
Exactly. So that's important. Anyway, Mrs. Peacock is in a fiery mood, in case you hadn't already guessed that. She advises her husband that if he continues prevaricating, she's going to kick him square in the gentleman's department. I like that. She's also getting the locks changed. She's trashed the outfit that he was hoping to wear later that night.
Because he's asked her to press his jacket. She goes, I did press it. I pressed it into the lavatory and pulled the chain.
Yeah, they were supposed to go off to some fancy event or something like that. Doesn't sound like it's happening anymore. She also says he's used his blow tickler for the last time.
Okay.
And she's off to see Mr. Rumbold and to get him demoted. So she charges off to Mr. Rumbold's office, currently occupied by Mrs. Slocum, and we get this classic scene, and I think it's the best scene in the whole episode, as the A and B plots collide in Mr. B's office. As the two characters mistake each other's identity, and as they talk at crossed purposes, the conversation spirals out of control. Mrs. Slocum thinks she's sitting a job interview in the presence of the HR lady. Mrs. Peacock thinks she's talking to Mr. Rumbold's secretary and her husband's bit on the side.
Yeah, just because Mrs. Slocum happens to be sitting in Mr. Rumbold's office.
Yes, and she says,
what else are you going to think?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've only seen this done once before in an awesome episode of Count Arthur Strong called The Day the Clocks Went Back. This is the episode where Michael, in order to cheer Arthur up, Michael buys him flying lessons.
Oh, no.
And they go along to the airfield, and Arthur meets another novice flying student, young Jeremy, and they both mistake, because of the way the dialogue goes, they both mistake each other for the instructor.
Yeah.
And essentially they get up into the... they take off together, neither of them really knowing how to fly a plane.
Yeah. Is it going too far to say it's one of the funniest moments in British comedy, Steve?
Oh,
could be going a bit far.
Be.
I don't know.
If you haven't seen it, listeners, it's just absolutely classic.
The only problem is we've just spoiled it.
Oh.
Because the first time you watch that scene, you don't know.
All right, well, misremember it and then go and watch it.
Yeah.
But can you think of any other times that you've seen this used so well as this example and the one in Count Arthur?
No, probably not this well. No, I can't remember. I'm stalling to see if I can remember any examples. There's millions, obviously, but I can't. No. And it's amazing because I totally had that same note, is that even though it's the B plot, it is the best scene in the episode. So I totally agree with you. It's hilarious, dude.
Yeah. Anyway, it's so good, we're going to listen to a clip. And as you listen to the clip, you'll understand how they come to have this misunderstanding about each other's identities.
Is this Mr Rumbold's office?
Oh, yes, that's right.
Where is he?
Well, I don't know, but I'm sure he'll be back before long.
Do you work for him?
Well, yes, I do.
You're the one then, aren't you?
Oh, I sincerely hope so.
You're older than I expected.
Well, I'm only a little over 40, and though I do say so as shouldn't, I have all the enthusiasm of a younger woman, combined with a great deal of experience.
You're pretty cool, aren't you?
Well, of course, it's not the first time I've been up for this sort of thing.
You've done it before, have you?
Oh, yes. I believe at jumping at every opportunity. And anything to get out of underwear. Well, there isn't much room behind the counter for a woman of my imagination.
Very good. Although the listener's not going to see this, Molly plays this so well. There's a point that you've probably heard in the clip where Mrs. Peacock says that Mrs. Slocum is older than she's expected.
Yeah.
Obviously, she knew that Miss Hazelwood was a young woman, so she's surprised to get there and...
It's an old battle axe.
It's an
as
old battle
Mr.
axe.
Lucas would describe it.
So she says she's older than she expected, and Mrs. Slocum whips her glasses off as if, taking her glasses off is going to de-age her 10 or 20 years.
Quite.
That's really good, really good. Back on the shop floor, Mr. Harmon rushes over to tell Captain Peacock that Miss Hazelwood's father has arrived looking for blood because she has cancelled her wedding, and Mrs. Peacock is chasing Mrs. Slocum around with an umbrella.
Now, quite often in shows like this, you'll hear such things being described secondhand, but you'll rarely see them because obviously it takes much more resources to actually show you something. And quite often when somebody mentions something that sounds hilarious, you create the image in your mind and you're cacking yourself because it's so good. But they show it, Steve. They show it.
Well, they show Miss Hazelwood's father. Is that what you mean?
No. They show Mrs. Peacock sprinting after Mrs. Slocum, waving an umbrella and about to cane her.
How could I have missed that?
You blink of an eye and you miss it, dude. It was the second time I watched this. I saw it and I went, oh my goodness, they actually did it.
I'm even going to say in my notes later, it's a shame they didn't show it.
Mrs. Slocum, right, wearing heels, went down those steps, and she's when she filmed this, she's probably about 5 years older than I am now. I couldn't get down those steps at that speed.
In a pair of high heels?
A pair of Asics. Especially not in a pair of heels. God. So,
what
well
a professional.
Done. Yeah.
Okay. So Captain Peacock takes off to deal with the ladies. In fact, we've just seen that that's not quite as it was in my notes. I thought it happened all off screen. Anyway, he asks Mr. Granger to step in for him on the floor. And of course, we get another case of mistaken identity as Mr. Hazelwood arrives on the floor and assumes that Mr. Granger, because he's doing the floor walking at the time, is the guy who's been causing all these headaches, and he smashes his daughter's now superfluous wedding cake over Mr. Granger's head.
We get a beautiful parallel, though, dude, because he does say, you're older than I expected, sort of deal, like happened with Mrs. Slocum.
Oh, good pickup, Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, cheers.
Very good. And, yes, we later discover that Mr Granger gets lots of currants and sultanas in his ears from the wedding cake, which we're going to get quite a lot of mileage out of that in one of the next scenes. Next, we get a scene in, well, it doesn't say, but I'm guessing it's a boardroom or something like that. Everyone's getting seated, and it's set up a bit like a courtroom. We've got the staff set up as if they were a jury. Mr Grace has come in, and he's going to be take the role of the judge. Mr Rumbold is sitting next to him, and he's type of in charge of proceedings. He's like a barrister. And Mr Harmon, he's kind of like the court orderly. He says,
night court flashbacks.
I know. I did think about that. Actually.
Is it Penny Lancaster, the secretary? She's what do they have the special title for the nice people that take the notes in the court?
That's right. That was a big feature of the last episode. That's right. So Mr Harmon, acting like a court orderly, says, "Calling Miss Monica Hazelwood," and later on he's going to receive pieces of evidence and admit them into the court proceedings or whatever, such as the sultana that falls out of Mr Granger's ear. Mr Rumbold announces that Mr Grace and I are most anxious that at the end of the day, every party concerned should leave this room completely satisfied.
Mr Grace and I are most anxious that at the end of the day, every party concerned should leave this room completely satisfied.
Does that include Mr Grace's secretary as well?
Mr Lucas, this is a serious matter. My whole future at Grace Brothers is at stake.
Well, I think you should be sent right off.
Well, Mr Lucas is a material witness to you being hit on the head.
Yeah, I was the one who cheered.
Listen, it's no laughing matter. She could well have suffered brain damage if it hadn't been for the fact she'd had her hair double lacquered for the interview.
Yeah, that's very good. Eventually, they decide that the best way forward is for Mrs Peacock to attend this hearing, or whatever you want to call it, as well, after she's had her umbrella confiscated for security purposes, of course, and for Captain Peacock to give a detailed account of all the precise circumstances that led to this unfortunate chain of events. So it's all going to come out. And it turns out that he had been giving Miss Hazelwood some fatherly advice last night about her forthcoming wedding, and we're going to listen to a clip of his explanation.
Miss Hazelwood was in a state similar to the one you see her in now, so I thought it best to run her home in my car. 6 miles outside Reading, I broke down. It was raining, and I tried to restart, but there must have been an electrical fault because there was no current in my battery.
I thought the currents were in Granger's ear.
We waited until dawn, when a patrol van started me up again. I suggested that Miss Hazelwood climb into the back.
That's exactly what I would have done.
I sat behind the wheel all night, trying to think what to say to the woman I love.
Why not jump in the front for a quick cuddle?
Quiet, Lucas.
Foolishly, I asked Mr Rumbold to perjure himself. Quite correctly, he refused so to do. For, after all, when the final account is balanced up in the book of life, we are men of integrity. What I've said is true, and I swear it, as a God-fearing man and an ex-officer of the Royal Army Service Corps.
That's his explanation, and it's quite a sweet speech. And the whole crew, and most importantly, Mrs Peacock, is convicted of the truth and reconciled.
You mean convinced, or you said convicted? A bit of a Freudian slip there.
So convinced of the truth and reconciled to her husband.
Yeah.
And we end with Mr Rumbold, on behalf of Grace Brothers, expressing the hope that the Peacocks will sail life's stormy seas into the calm waters of old age safely and irremovably together. And Captain Peacock says, very dryly, as his wife then hugs him, "We probably shall."
Yes. He doesn't look real happy about it.
Yes. Everyone's happy. It's just a bit of bite in that final line from Captain Peacock.
It's extremely well done. And then after that whopping mouthful of dialogue that you just gave us on behalf of Mr Rumbold, a brilliant line from Mr Humphries going, "I honestly thought people didn't speak like this anymore." That's quite a meta moment, saying that this script dialogue is absolutely ridiculous, and let's make a gag out of it. So they take liabilities and turn them into hilarious jokes, which is masterful.
I think we're probably going to go on to now talking about the episode in a bit more zoomed out and in the broad strokes, but I think yeah, that's probably a point we can make in this section, which is that they really balance the laughs and playing it light with also, there's some seriousness to it as well. So I guess that's kind of the reverse. What you're talking about there is that Captain Peacock gives this heartfelt speech, which maybe is a bit over the top, but that's really good in a dramatic way. But then they kind of take the edge off that by throwing in some laughs about it.
Yeah,
immediately afterwards.
I think balance might end up being a bit of a key word here.
Did you want to say something else about that?
Well, look, not about that scene, but about the notion of balance is that, like, this show had incredibly wide appeal. I mean, you know, it's not a long bow to draw to say it was incredibly popular everywhere it went, and it lasted for a hell of a long time. I think the reason that is you had the male characters in their little section doing their things from a male perspective, and you had the female characters doing their thing from their perspective, and everybody was sniping at everybody else. And so everybody got to explain their point of view, but they also got to take the absolute mickey out of everybody else. And meanwhile, while you're doing that gender thing, the Brits, as we know, Steve, are obsessed with class. And this has got all those layers. So you've got the very rich people like Mr. Grace and the common as muck people. And
who shouldn't be seen on the floor during
with
opening
your
days.
Mr. Mashers and your Miss Brahmses.
Yep.
But they all get their zingers in on everyone else. So everybody's included and everybody gets the mickey taken out of them. And I think they just balance everything superbly well. Yes, I don't know. That's my view.
Have you got notes about the overall situation of this episode? Just thoughts?
No, yeah, these are all just random thoughts. In this one, like, I think it's a non-typical episode because we spend quite a lot of time in Mr. Rumbold's office, and it's good that Captain Peacock's getting the tables flipped on him. So I like it for those very reasons. There's not a lot of Miss Brahms and Mr. Humphries in this one.
Yep.
Because normally Mr. Humphries gets a lot of good lines, and there's probably more stuff that the ladies counter and all this. So it's a non-typical episode, but it works really, really well. So, you know, just things like that. I've got other thoughts, but I'll let them be raised organically as you say your stuff.
Right, well, let's go through this little list. I think the jokes are landing throughout, and what we see is the staff are simultaneously enjoying Captain Peacock's spot of bother while supporting him through the ordeal at the same time, i.e. covering up for him like we talked about in that phone call. So they're enjoying poking a bit of fun at him and taking him down a notch or two after all the grief that he gives them. Are they doing this
because they genuinely care, or because in case it turns out all right for Captain Peacock, they don't want recriminations?
Oh, what are your thoughts?
I don't think they like him very much, and I don't think they're especially looking out for him, but they are enjoying the leverage they've kind of got over him, but they're also playing it safe in case he does weasel his way out of it and keeps being the floor walker. Then they haven't been seen to completely throw him under the bus.
Oh, that's another good pickup.
No, they've got some absolute beauties in on him, and he knows that they've got some,
Yeah, totally. There's an interesting situation in the A-plot where the audience has to contemplate whether Captain Peacock is guilty or not. And, you know, as we've already said, there was some very damning circumstantial evidence. Is it too much to say there's tension in this because of his character, which we know to be generally kind of straight down the line?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you, as you were watching it for the first time, or rewatching it for the first time for your yonks, did you find yourself wondering whether he was actually guilty or?
Yeah. And it's really cool because they set up a mystery, so it's a mystery plot. So within the first few minutes, they set up the mystery, which is scandal, in which the most pompous member of staff, you know, is seen to not have very good ethics and morals. But also then they make it into tension, exactly as you say, when they say, Mr. Hazelwood's on his way and Mrs. Peacock's on his way. And then when you hear that she's downstairs, you really do think, man, it's going to hit the fan here.
Yep.
So it goes from a mystery we have to solve to there's going to be some outright confrontation.
Yes, and I think what's interesting is that the lies, it turns out that the lies that Captain Peacock was telling everyone were, well, depending on your point of view about white lies, they were primarily being told to save Miss Hazelwood embarrassment over breaking off her engagement, and also to protect her reputation, like because she did spend the night in the car with him. So
true.
I think he was avoiding raising all that stuff in front of the staff, not for necessarily his own gain, but to keep her out of it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I agree with what you're saying.
Okay. What about the B plot? It doesn't feature strongly, as we've already said, but were you concerned that Mrs. Slocum might leave?
No.
No, that was never going to happen.
They're not going to give up one of their, what was it, the headline, because it was her and Trevor Bannister,
That's
as
right.
you said, who are supposed to be the stars. You don't give up Mrs. Slocum.
So there was no tension in the B plot like that?
No.
All right. As we've already said, the Mrs. Slocum and Mrs. Peacock scene was very strong, and I love it when the plot lines collide like that. And as a result of that, we get some typical A being served chaos. I think in most episodes, we get some kind of chaotic thing happening towards the end, don't we? It happens probably a bit earlier in this episode than it does typically, because it's probably 2/3 of the way through or something like that, where the cake gets donged on the head and people are getting chased with umbrellas. But
so what that would normally be the climax, whereas here it's just setting up the court case.
Yes, that's right. We've still got to get to the big thing at the end. Also think the logic hangs together really well. And we've already talked about the example of Mrs. Peacock not being known to the staff, so that she wouldn't be recognised. And the way they get put into Mr. Rumbold's office together is really well done. Like, they really paid attention to that when they were putting the script together.
It doesn't seem contrived or forced or anything. It all just seems pretty straight ahead.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they really paid a lot of attention to little bits of information leading up to that scene. I thought there were very few misses in terms of the gags in this episode. In fact, there was only one for me that landed a bit flat, and because it's a gag about a song from so long ago, I mean, it's the song In the Mood. You know the one I'm talking about, right? And the gag about it gets a huge, huge laugh from Mr. Grace, from the audience.
Right.
So it's obviously...
In 76, it was still...
It was hitting all the...
fully rocking.
Yeah, it was hitting all the marks in 76, but now it's like, whew.
They used to do that in Dad's Army quite a bit as well.
Did they?
Yeah. And just think that if In the Mood was set in the 40s, it must have some staying power.
Yep.
Yes. Anyway, sorry, where were we?
Well, I've really only got one more comment to make, and then we can see whether it goes into the Hall of Fame or not.
Ooh. Is it your big summing up comment? Or?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay, cool.
That's a bit of a tangent comment. I think the episode's an interesting time capsule in a way, because we get to revisit a period where society still held marriage in fairly high regard and enforced it through, I guess, expectations and norms and all this sort of stuff. And it's just bizarre watching it in this day and age, because everything on the floor appears to shut down in order to hear the case of Mrs. Peacock's complaint and get that sorted out. And the fact that Captain Peacock faces demotion for potentially having committed adultery, it's like, it's a bit mind-blowing.
It is.
Looking back at it from
Do
where
you
we are.
also think there's an element here, though, dude, of if Grace Brothers is publicly seen to be a sort of place where scandal happens, that could be bad for Grace Brothers. And, of course, they're protecting their bottom line of we mustn't be seen to have any cavortings going on between staff of Grace Brothers. So they scramble to have this inquiry just to sort of get it all sorted out and move on and sweep it under the rug before talk happens.
Could be a bit of that. I'd be interested to hear what the listeners think about that.
Let's take another little sidestep here, Steve.
Yes, all right.
20 years later, in The Thin Blue Line, you might recall an episode where Raymond was due to go up before the Promotions Review Board.
Yep.
And Derek Grimm was saying they're looking for steady, married, dependable blokes. So they don't want these divorcees and people who can't keep a relationship together. So I'm going to let the review board know that I've been married to my Tina. For about 50 billion years. And rah, 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 rah. And Raymond's going, I don't think that someone's married status makes the slightest bit of difference. And Derek Grimm says, well, I bloody hope it does, because I've been suffering for 20-odd years. I want to... Yes. But there you go. It's still being brought up, which is now, another 25 years ago now?
Yep.
But then 20 years on from Are You Being Served? I don't know what point I was making there, but it's just they brought it back up in Thin Blue Line. So.
There you go. Well, I'm at the end of my notes.
Oh.
Is there anything else you want to say before I nominate it for the Hall of Fame?
Yes, I've got 3 separate points to make,
Right.
Steve.
Go ahead.
So prepare for another 20 minutes of podcast. No. I've just got observations on 2 of the actors. Now, firstly, with as much respect as I have for Diana King and her squillions of appearances in every British show known to man, I think her performance as Mrs. Peacock in this is not great. It's not that she doesn't put 100% effort in, which she does. It's just I don't think she's struck the right tone. And maybe the only reason I think that is because she's acting opposite these people who are just so unbelievably good at what they do. So she's got scenes opposite Frank Thornton, and, you're going to come off second best. And then opposite Molly Sugden, how do you compete with that? And so I just think that while she's very good, she didn't make the right choices acting wise, but it seems a bit sort of nasty to point that out after such an enjoyable show we've just watched. But Mr. Lucas, I've got this theory about Trevor Bannister, which I've always been too scared to bring up because I think I'd get laughed at and shouted down by anyone who knows anything about comedy.
Go ahead and share it then.
Yeah, I shall. I'll prepare to be mocked. So he, to me, like I'd caught up with Are You Being Served, as we discussed before on the DVDs. I was going through a Hancock phase as well. Yep. And so much of the way he delivers his lines seems to be very Hancockian. And the reason I think I'll get mocked is because obviously one does not compare Trevor Bannister to Tony Hancock. You know what I mean? It's like they're light years apart. But I think he does. I think he delivers his lines, a lot of them, in a very Tony Hancockian sort of way. So I'm just going to put that out there and see what the punters think.
Running up the flagpole.
Yes. And hopefully infect a few people so that they'll never be able to watch this show the same way again without thinking, by cracky, Trevor Bannister's desperately trying to do a Tony Hancock there. And lastly, Steve, Michael Stainton, who's the only actor you didn't mention in your opening doodad, who played Mr. Hazelwood.
Yes. Is he known for something?
Well, not that I knew of, but I thought I'd better at least look him up. So he did 12 episodes of a sitcom called You Must Be the Husband, which starred the late, great Tim Brooke-Taylor. What? Yes, who, as you know, I love, having been a Goodies podcast person. So Tim Brooke-Taylor, it was one of his many sitcoms, You Must Be the Husband. Anyway, so Michael Stainton was a regular in that for 12 out of the 13 episodes. There you go. Also, a big
How many degrees
star.
of separation is that?
Yeah, that's heaps.
4.
But you'll like this one, though. In You Must Be the Husband, with Tim Brooke-Taylor and Michael Stainton, one of the regular characters, Steve, was Terry, the chef, Mr. Faulty from Faulty Towers.
No way.
Yeah. I've never seen him in another sitcom. So I think I've got all these billions of reasons to check out You Must Be the Husband.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and so you've got your nominating, Steve.
Yes.
Let's do that.
Yeah, I thought I would. So what about it?
Who were? No, look, I would totally put this into the Hall of Fame. I think you knew that before you even started. So I agree.
Oh,
brilliant.
there
What
you
a
go.
way to do it.
That was so easy.
Yeah, episode 100. There we go. I think, how
Swish.
overdue was this?
Are You Being Served? Oh. Yeah, I mean, as I was putting the notes together for this and going through the actors and the episode, how was it that we never brought it forward before? And I guess it just shows that there could be other sitcoms of similar stature out there that we haven't reached yet for whatever reason.
They've fallen through the cracks. So I was lost in thought there.
Yes, you were. That's all right. We'll nick off and speak to the listeners in, well, I'd like to say a month or so.
Yeah.
Certainly not more than 2 months.
Yeah, we'll see how we go, and it'll be my turn, and who knows what we've got, because I have nothing lined up. But now, after discussing some of these sitcoms, I do have thoughts.
I'm totally fascinated by the transplanting of sitcoms.
We could do a whole year of transplanted sitcoms, which we've suggested before, but I think it didn't make the final edit.
Yes, we've done a few, and finding them can be a bit of a challenge, but they are jolly good fun. Anyway, we'll sign off, and yes, we'll see you soon.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye. Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown, when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.